So hello, today I'm at St Mary the Virgin Church in Little Easton in Essex, and I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village itself. So Little Easton is a village in Essex. It's 2.5 miles from Great Dunmow and it's 1.6 miles from Great Easton to the north. It's 76 miles above sea level, or 249 feet in old money. Today's population is around 440. The village is surrounded by Essex farmland and the River Chelmer flows close by. In 2020, an archaeological dig was carried out at Highwood Quarry. 2 Iron Age roundhouses and pottery were discovered from around 300 BC. In Little Easton, the Romans had built a small fort along with a lookout tower, so a small Roman outpost would have been here. This would have been vital to the Roman settlement in nearby Great Dunmow. The Saxon settlement here in 1066 and before was ruled by the Thane, Duna or Dove, and we know that the manor here had 8 smallholders, 4 villagers and 2 slaves, and in 1066 60 pigs and 60 sheep would graze these very lands. The Normans by 1086 had taken over the manor and its rights, for William the Conqueror sent William de Warenne here to be lord. William, a noble Norman, fought at the Battle of Hastings and was awarded with 300 manors in 13 counties in England. He was a battle-hardened lord on campaigns throughout his life, mortally wounded at the siege of Pevensey Castle in 1088. He would be buried next to his wife in Sussex, not far from Hastings. I did read that William de Warenne was also tenant-in-chief here, owning 4 beehives, which was a sign of wealth. The manor would pass on to the Walter de Windsor of today's Windsor Castle, where Queen Elizabeth II is buried. Now Walter would have a son Robert, and he would become the Baron of Easton, or Easton as it was called. And Little Easton Manor is still here today. Isn't that incredible? Now Little Easton Manor would pass from family to family, and Godfrey de Louvain, a Brussels count and valiant knight, would own it in December 1210. Can you imagine that? In the Royal Red Book it read he owned 5 knights' fees in Easton in Essex. Now we stand at the manor itself in Little Easton. Now by 1540 Henry, Earl of Essex, was the owner, but he would fall from his horse and would be buried at the manor in Hertfordshire. In 1589 Queen Elizabeth I would grant this old manor, by now a rebuilt Tudor hall as we see today, to Henry Maynard, Esquire. Now Henry at this time was below a knight but above a gentleman, and you can see much of the Maynard family in this amazing church nearby here in Little Easton. So the current owner of Little Easton Manor has pointed out this amazing set of stairs that is believed to be a tunnel that connects up to the church. Now, in the time of Oliver Cromwell and the English Civil War, it's quite possible that the priest here could make his escape from the church through the tunnel that would lead here. And this tunnel would take you directly to the church. It's quite incredible to think of that. So today's Little Easton Hall is used for various events such as weddings and a car show, I believe, and they've got a firework display coming up. Just give you an idea how close it is to the church itself. We just pan around. It's quite feasible that the tunnel would reach it from where I'm standing. Now if we go way back, Little Easton was called Ad Turin, or at the tower, because its church today, St Mary's, has a tower and Great Easton's has not. Now there was at one time a defensive moat around the church, and in the 17th century the Maynard family had it filled in. On the northwest side, where we're looking now, you can still see the 17th century buildings that followed the original moat curve. And it begs the question, was the moat Saxon, Norman, or perhaps even earlier? One day we may find out. Now we look at the village pub, the Stag Inn. Little Easton has just one pub. I cannot tell you its age, but in 1874, Mrs Mary Matthews was the landlady here. And now this old inn is under new management in this very year. It's an exciting time for the village. Now in 1881 there was a total of 295 villagers here, made up of 33 men and 2 women who worked on the farms here. 23 women worked as domestic servants, most likely in Easton Lodge, and I wonder what stories they could tell. Now in 1881 blizzards affected Essex. The British were defeated 3 times during the Boer War in Africa against the Dutch farmers, and Cunard would launch the first steel transatlantic liner. Now whilst we're here looking at the sign, you can see that there are 2 initials. There's an M for Maynard family and there's W for the Countess of Essex. And if you look, you've got a B-26 aeroplane from the American 386 bomber group, and we'll look at that later. Opposite the village sign we've got the village memorial, remembering those that lost their lives in World War I. So now we're standing by the boundary of Easton Lodge. Now this was built by Henry Maynard Esquire in 1597. Now Henry was private secretary to the Lord Chancellor of Queen Elizabeth I. And it was Elizabeth herself that would reward Henry Maynard with Estaines Manor and 10,000 acres. Now Easton Lodge today is only 3/4 of a mile from St Mary's Church. Now the lodge itself has got a long history, but from 1943 the 386th US Air Force took residence here, and we should have a look at the Air Force, what's left of it, the runway. Now it's an incredible tale this, but in 1939 the Home Guard and the British Army would requisition Maynard's home at Easton Hall. Now just to give you an idea where we are, so Little Easton Hall is over there, or Lodge. And now we're actually standing where RAF Great Dunmow was. It was built by the US Army's 818th Engineer Battalion. If I pan around, we've got some of it left, or at least the concrete. Now the heavy concrete runways would cut straight through Easton Lodge's grounds where we're standing now. 10,000 trees were removed for the war effort, exactly where we stand now, 10,000. Now by 1943 the American 386th Bombardment Group were flying missions from here in their B-26 medium bombers called the Crusaders. If we pan around, the runway we're just going to walk to will be here. So I'll give you an idea just how wide this runway was. I'm going to walk the width of it. It's incredible. You can see the narrower section going forward. So you can imagine the many Americans and British airmen making their way to the Stag Inn each night from here. The base I read had access to the big house, which was Easton Lodge. There were two mess sites here, officers and airmen's housing, and a communal shop selling groceries, plus the hangars. Originally the 386th came from the hot and sunny Florida, USA. Their missions were to bomb airfields and gun batteries over France. By 1944 they would concentrate on bombing bridges and coastal batteries, ready for the invasion of D-Day. Now they would fly a total of 257 missions. The RAF's 190 squadron would take over the base when the Crusaders moved to Normandy in France in 1944. Now the local population made good use of the changeover between the Americans and the British to gather rationed food tins and American luxuries left behind. Now the RAF would fly SOE, Special Operations, from here to Norway and Germany. Today all that remains is a sign where the bomb store once stood. Now Little Easton, where I'm standing, a local has told me that the housing developments, or the people are trying to build thousands of houses across here. Now I'm going to backtrack to 1874, and what we're looking at on the left are the almshouses, which aged 4 aged widows. Now the almshouses are very distinctive and were built by the Barnester Maynard, Lord of the Manor here in 1716. Now it was his grandmother, Lady Margaret Barnester, who in her last will and testament requested that 4 poor widows of this parish be cared for way back in 1662. That's 1662. So now we've made it to St Mary the Virgin's Church. The walls are of flint rubble with mixed brick, and some are Roman. Dressings are of stone. Starting with the West Tower, it's 11 feet by 9 feet and late 15th century, and you can see it's built in 2 stages. If you look in the southeast corner, you can see the stair turret with embattled parapet. If we look at the top, we can see some gargoyles. The clock, I've got no date on this. The west doorway shows heraldic shields of 2 families, most likely the patrons who built this fine tower. So now we should go inside. I'd just like to mention that this fine old church is open daily. I should take my cap off. We should pan around and see what the south, or the west doorway, shall we say, looks like. Now if we pan upwards, we have a west window. Now inside the west tower, we've got a west turret door. It's made from one piece of solid oak. It's panelled. It's late 15th century. You can imagine a modern day hinge not lasting this long, 500 years. Now we're looking at the nave itself, and it measures 54 feet by 19 feet. This is 12th century, a very early nave indeed. And we pan around. We have a roll of rectors. Now I counted 52 rectors on this board, with Robert Herward of 1336 the first. The fourth rector, John, had a most interesting surname. And also look how many Johns there are in succession. Now if we pan around, we can see a war memorial from World War One. And we're coming up to the Remembrance Sunday. Now we're looking at the font. Now I can't tell you any details of this, I don't know the age, but it could be around 15th century. And if you look down, you can see the priest's step. Now we should walk forward. Now on the north wall, we're looking at a wall painting with a seated figure. Below there's border of foliage and a small figure. It's the 13th century, incredibly old. You can see the small figure there, and below what it would have looked like. 13th century. Now if we pan around, there's a window on the south side. Now this window shows Mother Mary with children. Now on the left panel it says Fides in Latin, which means trust. The central one is Charitas, which is charity, and Spes on the right side is hope. So trust, charity, hope. So we should walk further down towards the chancel, and now we're looking at a royal crest, coat of arms. So this royal coat of arms is from 1660. It's the coat of arms of Charles II, who was the son of Charles I. Charles I was executed by Oliver Cromwell in 1649. Now Charles I, before his execution, requests 2 shirts to prevent him shivering, so the crowd would not mistake it for fear. Can you imagine that? Now if we pan around to the south side, south wall, the nave, got a really interesting painting here. Now this wall painting shows a series of 8 subjects representing the Passion, all in the 15th century. So the first one, the procession to Calvary. Second one is the crucifixion. The third one is the descent from the cross. And next to it, a panel shows a defaced one figure remaining. This is the remains of 7 saints. This one's an interesting one. It's called Pieta. In Christian art, it shows the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Jesus after his body was removed from the cross. Now, the Pieta developed in Germany around the 1300 period. reaching Italy in the 1400 period. This is another interesting panel. This is Christ before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. Now, Pontius Pilate served under Emperor Tiberius from AD 26 to AD 37. The Jewish historian Josephus from the 1st century mentions incidents of tension and violence between the Jewish population and Pilate's administration. Next, we have the last panel, which is Christ crowned with thorns. Now, the Roman soldiers mocked his title, King of the Jews. The crown is mentioned 3 times in the Gospels, and it's said that it was on display in Jerusalem in 409. Can you imagine that? Today it's housed in the Notre Dame Cathedral in France. Now we're going to pan around to the left. We're looking at what is known as the organ chamber. Originally it was. It's an unknown date, but it's most possibly Victorian. And I want to show you some really interesting windows in here. Now, the west window is dedicated to the Crusaders of the 386th Bomber Group, US Air Force. And the memorials we can see in front of us, it lists the 200 airmen that never returned to America. 200. This is a bomber. A B-26 bomber, apologies. Beneath the window is a plaque that explains what the window means or represents. This window is called Friendship and Peace. It shows US airmen in conversation with an RAF officer in close cooperation that existed. It also shows US airmen with villagers, close ties in the community. Easton Lodge is in the background. You can see the marauders there above. You can see the modern airmen with the ancient Crusaders, linking them with love of God and fight for right. If you look above, you can see Christ with his outstretched arms. Now below we've got a series of kneeling cushions. Now we're looking at the window of Friendship and Peace. I think I got it wrong way around actually. Now we'll have a look. So this is the correct one. So US airmen in conversation with RAF officer, close cooperation existed. You've got US airmen with villagers, close ties to the community. You can see Easton Lodge in the background. At the very top we've got a dove with an olive branch, symbolising the Holy Spirit and peace. And next to that we've got the eagle, which represents the Bible. Thou shalt mount up with wings as eagles. We've also got an oak tree that made way for this airfield. Oak tree is also a symbol of strength. Both windows were donated in October 1990. And I'm afraid I can't find out who's by, but I guess it's the American side. It's a great thing they've done here. Now, when I consider I've just walked across those fields and they're going to build a lot of houses there, it's incredible that so many thousands of airmen were actually stationed there. Now there's just fields. It's hard to believe. We're going to walk over to this bust. Now this bust is of Jack Philby. He was a rector here for 25 years. And a local lady told me that he was a very popular priest here, and he put on a lot of community events, so he was much loved. Now we're looking at a pipe organ that was built in 1881. It was a gift by Daisy, the Countess of Warwick. Now we're looking at the chancel, which was 28 feet by 18 feet. The chancel was rebuilt and lengthened in 1230. Now in 1230, Henry III invades France, leaving from Portsmouth. He would join forces with the Duke of Brittany in St. Malo. Taking one castle, the French barons gave homage to him. Henry returned triumphant to Portsmouth that same year. We should look at the east window. Now the stonework of this east window is 1470. When this stone window was fitted, England was embroiled in the War of the Roses between two families, the House of York and the House of Lancaster, a civil war. This war would last 37 years, extinguishing the male lines of two dynasties, leading to the Tudor family inheriting the throne of England. Very detailed window. Now we face the high altar itself, and you can see the poppies there getting ready for remembrance. And every church across every parish in England, Wales and Scotland will be remembering those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Now we're looking on the north wall, and this is a memorial said to be that of Lady Eleanor de Lavan of 1397, and who was the wife of Sir William Bourchier of 1375. If you look, you can see a small effigy, only 2 feet long, in the centre. You've got heraldic shields of the family. They combine into the shield in the centre there. If you go to the top, the two families and their parents' shields at the very top. Behind the altar we've got an incredibly fine carving in oak, I guess. Now we should pan around to the south side. We've got an amazing memorial here. So this memorial is to Sir Henry Bourchier of 1483. He was the first Earl of Essex, the second Count of EU, and the 5th Baron of Bourchier. Henry was in fact the great-grandson of Edward III, King of England. Most ornate. You can see a most ornate brass. See Henry wearing his shield or his armour, plate armour, cloak. See the sword. We follow it down. His feet rest on an eagle. See the wings. Now you can actually make a brass rubbing of this if you make a donation. Now we're moving on to Lady Eleanor de Louvain of 1397. And you can see she wears a red dress and cloak. You can see a pendant hanging down. It's 14th century enamel is amazing. You can see the tassel there. Her feet also rest on an eagle with wings. Now I have made a more detailed video of this, which I recommend you look at. So now we shall enter the South Chapel. Now the South Chapel measures 39 feet by 18 feet. It's 15th century. Now originally it was called the Manor Chapel after the family, and also the Bullshire family before that, or the Bullshire Chapel before that, should we say. The actual chapel itself was paid for by Lady Eleanor de Louvain and her husband, Sir William Bullshire, who was a feudal baron of Little Easton in 1375. You can see all the memorials in here. Quite incredible. So on the south wall we're looking at a memorial window paid for by Viscount Henry Maynard in 1837. It would be his great-granddaughter Daisy Maynard who would inherit the estate. Now the Latin inscription says, "Born today, who was born from eternity, in vain the evil heart of Pilate God wants to command." Beautiful window. The detail. There's Pilate washing his hands. Also on the south wall we have a memorial to Sir Henry Maynard of 1610 and his wife Susan Pearson. Now Sir Henry was an English politician. He was secretary to the Lord High Treasurer, allowing him to gain much land in Essex. And if we look we can see his many children, or their many children. This again I've done in great detail in another video. In the corner we have the original whipping posts and stocks of Little Easton. So these most likely originate from the 18th century, possibly before. Now we should go into the southwest corner. So this tomb is of Francis Cavendish from Devon, who would marry Sir William Maynard, the first Baron of Little Easton in 1608. Lady Frances would die here in 1613, aged 20 from childbirth. Now we're looking at an altar tomb to William Maynard of 1640, who was the first Baron of Little Easton. And that was his first wife that we just talked about there. Now William would enter the inner temple of barristers and judges in London. And in the same year he would marry, in 1608, he would marry his first wife, Frances Cavendish from Devon. They would have one child. And then William would marry his second wife, Anne Everard, who's up here, 1647. Now, Anne Everard was born in nearby Great Waltham. Her father was a member of Parliament. Now, this memorial was erected in the 18th century by the Maynard family. And you can notice that it's made in a Roman period, where they're wearing togas. Now in 1867 a very special lady indeed would come to Little Easton. Her name was Frances Maynard, known to her friends simply as Daisy. For in 1867 she would inherit Easton Lodge. She was in fact only 3. But many years later Daisy would marry Lord Brooke and become the Countess of Warwick. Daisy would make her fame by holding social events here for the rich and famous. But she was much more than a socialite, a real fighter for social injustice and helping the poor. And on my travels at nearby Great Dunmow, it was Daisy that converted the village lockup into a soup kitchen for the poor. The venison from these very lands was served up there. Daisy's list of friends who stayed there were incredible. Charlie Chaplin, Gracie Fields, George Formby, Ellen Terry, a leading actress who would hold poetry readings. H.G. Wells would actually live here. He wrote War of the Worlds. The Prince of Wales' son, the Prince of Wales, son of Victoria, Queen Victoria, would spend much time here in social events. He himself would become King Edward VII. Now we shall leave the church. And we'll have a quick walk around the grounds. Please, if you come here, fill in the visitor book. So here we can see the blocked up south doorway. You still see the mason's marks. How incredible is that? And this is most likely the original stoop. Very unusual headstones. There's the almshouses, very close. And what a difference 24 hours makes, because the weather yesterday was pretty grim. There was a lot of rain, so today it's a much better day for filming. See, it's a fairly large cemetery. It's all the way down here. This is the old boot scraper, most likely for the priest. Most possibly the crypt. It's a headstone right up against the wall there, the buttress. So this must be where the ashes are interred, in this circle. It's an unusual design. So now we're looking at the oldest part of the church, which is the nave. So St Mary the Virgin Church is open to the community. Like I say, it's open more or less every day, and they carry out baptisms, weddings and funerals here. And I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.